The digital clock on my bedside table glowed 3:00 a.m., a familiar, unwelcome sentinel in the silent gloom of my Atlanta apartment. I was 42, a man etched with the fine lines of too many early mornings and late nights spent hunched over a glowing screen, chasing deadlines and elusive perfection. My name is Silas Thorne, and by trade, I'm a digital architect, building intricate systems and complex visual narratives. By nature, I am jaded, meticulous, and as time would prove, resilient. The jadedness wasn't born from a single moment, but from a cumulative weight, primarily the bitter residue of intellectual property theft from years ago. A former colleague, a smooth-talking charlatan named Marcus, had meticulously unraveled months of my most innovative work, rebranding it as his own, landing a lucrative contract that should have been mine. The legal battles that followed had been a drawn-out, draining affair, stripping me of not just reputation and a major career opportunity, but also a good chunk of my savings and, more importantly, my naive belief in professional integrity. It left me with a deep-seated distrust and a quiet, simmering contempt for those who exploit others' work. That loss had calcified something within me, turning ambition into caution and trust into perpetual suspicion. I'd learned to live with it, of course. Time, as they say, dulls even the sharpest edges of betrayal. But it leaves scars, phantom pains that flicker to life when you least expect them. And sometimes those pains demanded more than just quiet endurance. My apartment, a testament to my meticulous nature, was ordered to the point of austerity. Every book aligned, every cable coiled, every piece of art precisely angled. It was a physical manifestation of my need for control in a world that had once spiraled wildly out of my grasp. Yet even in this meticulously curated sanctuary, the ghost of past injustices could find purchase. That's where Ellie came in years ago. She'd been a fresh face, a junior designer at a sprawling tech agency where I was then a lead. Her energy was almost palpable, a stark contrast to my own weary professionalism. She carried herself with an air of determined independence, a quiet defiance that I, in my detached observations, found subtly intriguing. I heard whispers that she hailed from a very traditional region of the country, a strict Muslim society, and had apparently cut ties with her family, choosing the bustling anonymity of the capital, Atlanta, to carve out her own path. It was a story that, despite my jadedness, resonated with a faint echo of admiration for her tenacity. She was an outsider like me in my own way, though our reasons for being so were vastly different. One sweltering Atlanta afternoon, a message popped up from her. A side commission, she called it, a little something outside of company hours. She needed a suite of abstract data visualizations for a concept presentation she was putting together for an internal pitch. My specialty, she'd gushed. My imposter syndrome, a persistent low hum beneath my professional confidence, flared. Despite my experience, I still occasionally questioned if I was truly as good as people said. It was a ridiculous notion, I knew, born from the psychological bruising of Marcus's theft, which had tried to convince me my work wasn't truly mine to begin with. It's a bit niche, she'd said, her eyes wide and earnest, and I'm on a shoestring budget. She offered a ludicrously small payment, barely covering my time, let alone the specialized software licenses I maintained. Any sane professional, especially one with my experience, would have laughed. But something in her plea, or perhaps my own lingering self-doubt, made me hesitate. Maybe it was the quiet admiration I felt for her apparent struggle for independence, a sense of shared underdog status. Or maybe subconsciously I just wanted to prove to myself that I could still produce exceptional work, even under undervalued circumstances. I'll do it, I found myself saying, the words leaving a strange taste in my mouth, a mix of foolish generosity and quiet resolve. But it'll be bare bones, no revisions beyond a single pass. Ellie had practically beamed. Thank you, Silas, you're a lifesaver. I poured myself into the project, fueled by my meticulous nature. Even for a paltry sum, my work was my signature. The visualizations were intricate, transforming dense datasets into elegant, flowing streams of light and shadow, revealing hidden patterns and compelling narratives. I meticulously crafted each animation, ensuring every node connected, every transition flowed seamlessly. It was art disguised as data. I delivered the files, received the meager payment, and true to my word, moved on. The project, as far as I knew, was simply another ghost in my portfolio, forgotten amidst the deluge of larger, more significant endeavors years past. I moved on from that agency, taking my skills and my jaded wisdom to new pastures. Ellie, I heard through the grapevine, had done the same. The memory of that small, undervalued commission faded, becoming just another indistinct pixel in the vast canvas of my career. My emotional landscape remained largely placid, a quiet calm overlaying the deep reservoir of distrust I carried. Then the phantom pain stirred. It began with an email, innocuous at first glance. A recruiter from a smaller, niche consultancy, someone I vaguely remembered from a LinkedIn connection, reached out. Silas, the message read, I hope you're well. I came across something intriguing and immediately thought of you. Could you confirm if this is your work? Attached was a screenshot. A high-resolution image of one of the abstract data visualizations I'd created for Ellie. It was unmistakably mine, a unique signature in its aesthetic, but it wasn't from my online portfolio. It was from a now-defunct project website, long since scrubbed from the active internet, yet preserved somewhere in the digital archives. The website belonged to a mid-sized design firm and the project was credited to a team. A team that the recruiter's email subtly implied included Ellie, a cold, familiar knot tightened in my gut. My jadedness warred with a fresh surge of indignation. The memory of that underpaid work, the imposter syndrome that had led me to accept it, resurfaced with uncomfortable clarity. Ellie hadn't just used my work, she had subsumed it, folded it into her own, giving no credit, no acknowledgement. It wasn't just about the money, it was about the fundamental violation of intellectual property, the insidious act of taking someone else's creation and claiming it as your own. It was Marcus all over again, just on a smaller, more intimate scale. Yes, I replied, my fingers hovering over the keyboard, that is indeed my work. I was commissioned to create it for a private project several years ago. I omitted Ellie's name, wanting more information before I fully revealed my hand. The recruiter's reply was swift, confirming my suspicions. Thank you, Silas, that's very helpful. We had some questions about the originality of elements submitted by a candidate we were considering for a recent position. We were particularly interested in how closely her portfolio aligned with our values of integrity and ethical practice. The candidate, Ellie, of course, a quiet fury began to simmer. This wasn't Marcus, a grand, industry-shaking theft. This was Ellie, the struggling, independent young woman I'd felt a flicker of sympathy for. The betrayal felt smaller yet sharper, like a sliver of glass under the skin. The original project, the one she'd used my work for, had apparently never been publicly released. Both Ellie and I had long since switched jobs. The pragmatic, jaded part of me argued, let it go, Silas, it's old news, no real harm done beyond a bruised ego and a few $100, and for a while I did. I tucked the incident away, another bitter footnote in my mental ledger of human failings. It was just a minor infraction, not worth the energy of a protracted battle, not when I remembered the exhausting, soul-crushing fight against Marcus. It felt almost beneath me. The cynicism that had protected me for so long convinced me that engaging would only bring more frustration, more wasted time. What was the point? The universe, it seemed, was inherently flawed, and battling every minor injustice was a fool's errand. My days continued, predictable and precise. I worked, I exercised, I lost myself in the quiet hum of my meticulously ordered life. The incident with Ellie became a distant echo, a low thrum of annoyance that occasionally resurfaced but never truly escalated. I told myself it was handled. I told myself it didn't matter, but it did. It always did. Months later, a new email landed in my inbox, this one from my current company's internal HR system. A routine update on new hires and current applicants. As I scrolled through, my finger paused. There, under the list of candidates for a senior design role, was a familiar name, Ellie. She was applying to my company. To the very place where I now finally felt a genuine sense of belonging and respect, a professional home I had painstakingly built after the chaos Marcus had wrought. My breath hitched. The quiet fury that had been simmering for so long erupted into a silent conflagration. It was one thing to let a past transgression lie dormant. It was another entirely to watch the perpetrator walk into my domain, seeking a fresh start, perhaps even a new opportunity to continue their pattern of deceit. This wasn't just about a screenshot anymore. It was about the sanctity of my professional space, the quiet peace I had cultivated. Ellie had made it through the initial rounds, HR notes indicated. She was a strong candidate on paper, articulate and polished. She was, in fact, poised to make it to the final interview stage. The thought sent a jolt through me, cold and sharp. Her past transgression, the one I had so casually dismissed, was now poised to infiltrate my present. And the idea of working alongside her, knowing what I knew, seeing her potentially repeat her pattern, was utterly repugnant, a decision solidified in my mind, cold and hard. This wasn't about the grand vindication I'd once sought against Marcus. This was about drawing a line, about protecting the integrity of my space. This was about a small, precise act of prevention. My jadedness told me that people rarely changed. My meticulousness demanded that I address the facts. My resilience, that quiet strength forged in past battles, prepared me for whatever came next. The opportunity was here, neatly presented. It wasn't a public shaming, not a legal battle. It was a quiet word, a factual disclosure within the bounds of a hiring process. It felt almost professional. This was my chance to ensure that those who exploited others' work would, at the very least, face consequences, however small, when they stepped into my orbit. Subscribe to Tales of Revenge channel for new revenge stories daily. I knew in that moment that my own tale was about to take a decisive and perhaps irreversible turn. Act 2. Struggle, the desperation, descent into darkness and continuous progression. The email from HR sat open on my screen, Ellie's name a stark beacon pulling me back to a past I'd tried to bury. My first instinct, fueled by the cold logic of my jadedness, was to simply ignore it. Let the chips fall where they may, but the thought curdled in my stomach. The image of Marcus smiling through a press conference, claiming my innovation as his own, flashed through my mind. No. I wouldn't be a passive observer this time. Even if it was a small battle I had to fight. I meticulously drafted an email to Sarah, the lead HR manager whom I'd known for years and respected deeply. My language was precise, factual, devoid of emotion. I explained the commission, the low payment, my imposter syndrome at the time, acknowledging my own vulnerability, and then the core of the matter, how Ellie had used my work uncredited on a past project. I attached the original files I delivered to her, dated and timestamped, alongside the screenshot provided by the recruiter and the recruiter's confirming email. Evidence meticulously laid out. It was not an accusation, it was a simple presentation of facts. I concluded by stating that I felt it was information pertinent to their assessment of a candidate's professional ethics, especially given the company's strong stance on intellectual property. I hit send, a strange mix of relief and unease washing over me. It felt like a small, necessary step, a quiet vindication. I hadn't destroyed her, merely held her accountable, prevented her from potentially bringing her questionable practices into my professional sanctuary. It was, I told myself, a clean, justified act. A few days later, Sarah called me into her office. Her expression was grave but not angry. "Silas," she began, "thank you for bringing this to our attention. We conducted our own due diligence, cross-referencing everything. Her story didn't hold up. We've decided not to move forward with her application." "I see," I replied, a carefully neutral tone. I felt a faint stir of satisfaction. It was over. A minor brushfire extinguished before it could spread. I hadn't reveled in her downfall, merely ensured that justice in this small sphere was served. I genuinely believed that was the end of it. The memory of the situation began to fade again, relegated to the dusty corners of my mind, alongside other minor professional annoyances. I went back to my routines, the quiet hum of my ordered life. Months, then a year, drifted by. My company thrived, I moved up, the challenges grew, and my focus remained firmly on the future. Ellie was a forgotten footnote, a faint ripple in the vast ocean of my career. The feeling of vindication, though mild, had been enough. It wasn't about vengeance, it was about principle, or so I told myself then. The second shoe dropped. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was a quiet, almost melancholic whisper from an old ex-coworker of ours, a mutual acquaintance named David. We were having coffee, catching up on careers and the absurdities of life in corporate America. The conversation meandered, touching on old colleagues, and then David's voice lowered. "You know, Silas," he said, stirring his coffee slowly, "remember Ellie? From the old agency?" My muscles tensed, an involuntary reaction. "Vaguely," I lied, trying to sound nonchalant. David sighed. "It's a tough one. Heard through the grapevine she's back home, like back home, back to that really traditional region." My brow furrowed. "Oh, I thought she was doing well for herself here." David shook his head. "Apparently not. She bounced around a few jobs after that last big application fell through, you know, the one where she almost landed that senior role here. Heard she got rejected pretty hard from that one. Anyway, after that, she just couldn't catch a break. A couple of short-term gigs, nothing solid, and her personal life too, apparently. She was dating a lot, trying to build a new life, but it all just fell apart. Career stalled, relationships fizzled out, said it was her last straw. She couldn't afford to stay in Atlanta anymore, had to return to her parents." He paused, taking a sip. "Last I heard, she's almost 29 now. Single, which in her culture apparently is a big deal at that age. No career, no prospects. Word is her parents are arranging her marriage. With whoever will have her, you know. Sounds pretty bleak after all that fight to get out." The words hit me with the force of a physical blow, not because I felt a rush of triumph, but because I felt a profound, unsettling disquiet. Ruined her future. The Reddit title, echoing from a hypothetical future, resonated in my mind. This wasn't just a job rejection. This wasn't just a principled stand. This was a catastrophic unraveling. Her independence, her dreams of a life far removed from tradition, all of it seemingly extinguished by a chain of events I had, however unintentionally, set in motion. David continued, oblivious to the storm raging inside me. "Hard to imagine, isn't it? From a bright, ambitious young woman carving out her own way to that. Back to square one, but with the added baggage of her choices here." I nodded, unable to speak, my mind racing. This was not the mild vindication I'd envisioned. This was a consequence far exceeding the perceived crime, a ripple effect that had become a tidal wave sweeping her away. The details David provided painted a bleak picture, the difficulty of a single woman returning to such a strict society after having lived independently, dated, and experienced a different world. She wouldn't just be returning, she'd be returning as a failure, stripped of agency, forced into a life she'd actively tried to escape. A cold, hard truth settled in my stomach. I hadn't just rejected her. I had, in essence, participated in the dismantling of her entire existence, her chosen identity. My meticulous nature, which valued precision and measurable outcomes, was now grappling with the immeasurable, devastating scale of her ruin. My jadedness, which had once rationalized simply letting things go, now recoiled at the sheer weight of what had transpired. This wasn't petty revenge. This was life-altering, and I had been the silent, unwitting architect of its collapse. The satisfaction I'd felt earlier dissipated, replaced by a deep, gnawing unease. Was this what justice looked like? Or was it something far darker, something that mirrored the destructive force of Marcus's theft, simply turned in a different direction? The revelation plunged me into a profound internal struggle. I walked around my apartment, the familiar order suddenly feeling oppressive, a cage rather than a sanctuary. The quiet hum of my precise life became a maddening drone. I replayed my conversation with Sarah, my carefully worded email, my conviction that I was merely doing the right thing. But the outcome, Ellie's desolate fate, gnawed at me. My own past, the betrayal by Marcus, flared to life with renewed intensity. The years of struggle to rebuild my reputation, the lost opportunities, the quiet trauma. My initial reaction to Ellie's plagiarism was a direct consequence of that unresolved pain. I had wanted accountability, a clear line drawn, but this felt disproportionate. My meticulousness, usually a source of strength, became a curse. I dissected every detail David had shared, every nuance of Ellie's situation. I researched her hometown, trying to grasp the strictures of the society she was returning to. The picture grew grimmer. Marriage at 29 after having dated outside the community would brand her. She wouldn't just be a bride, she'd be a woman with a past, a problem to be solved. Her spirit, her independence would be crushed. The anger returned, but this time it wasn't just directed at Ellie. It was directed at the larger, insidious nature of intellectual property theft itself. It wasn't just about a project or a job. It was about the way it could dismantle lives, erode trust, and create a ripple effect of devastation. Marcus had stolen my professional identity. Ellie had tried to steal my creative identity, and in stopping her, I had inadvertently stripped her of her personal identity, her very future. The rock bottom wasn't a sudden fall, but a slow, suffocating realization. The justice I'd enacted against Ellie hadn't healed my own old wounds. It had merely inflicted new ones, albeit on someone else. My deep-seated distrust hadn't lessened. It had intensified, becoming a pervasive sense of moral ambiguity. Was this what revenge was? A cycle of destruction, where one person's violation led to another's ruin. I stared at the ceiling for hours each night, the quiet of my apartment amplifying the chaos in my mind. My resilient nature had always meant enduring, bouncing back. But what if enduring wasn't enough? What if merely surviving meant tacitly accepting the brokenness of the system? What if the only way to truly heal was to not just survive the theft, but to fundamentally dismantle the forces that enabled it? This wasn't just about Ellie anymore. This was about Marcus, the original perpetrator who had walked away largely unscathed, building his empire on the ashes of my reputation. This was about the systemic vulnerabilities that allowed intellectual property theft to flourish unchecked. The Ellie incident, with its unintended and devastating consequences, had become a dark mirror, forcing me to confront the unfinished business of my own past. It showed me the sheer destructive power of professional plagiarism, not just on the victim, but on the perpetrator and, chillingly, on anyone caught in the crossfire of retribution. The petty revenge of the job rejection felt hollow now, a mere precursor to a far deeper, more consuming need for genuine justice, not just for myself, but for the principle of creative integrity. I realized then that my jadedness had made me complacent, my meticulousness had been confined to details, not grand strategy, and my resilience had only been tested on my survival, not on systemic change. I needed to do more. Not just for Ellie, though her fate weighed heavily on me, but for the scarred, cynical man I had become. The job rejection I now saw was not the end of the story, it was merely the first domino. The real fight, the meticulous, complex, potentially morally ambiguous fight I had been building towards my entire career, was just beginning. My laptop, usually a tool of creation, now became a weapon. I started researching not just Ellie's background, but the wider world of intellectual property law, tracing the cracks in its foundation. I re-examined every detail of Marcus's original theft, searching for overlooked vulnerabilities, forgotten avenues. My resilience, once a quiet endurance, morphed into a fierce, unwavering resolve. I wasn't just going to survive this time. I was going to architect a reckoning, one that would make the true cost of plagiarism painfully clear, not just to one individual but to the very institutions that fostered it. The long nights returned, but this time they were filled with purpose. The quiet hum of my apartment was now punctuated by the soft click of keys, the whir of hard drives, the meticulous mapping of connections and consequences. This wasn't about anger anymore, not purely. It was about precision. It was about a deep, strategic understanding of how the gears of betrayal turned and how to grind them to a halt. The revenge, I realized, wouldn't be swift or public. It would be a slow, methodical dismantling, a precise surgical strike. And Ellie, unknowingly, had provided the final, agonizing push I needed to begin. Subscribe to Tales of Revenge channel for new revenge stories daily. I knew this was a story that demanded to be told, not just to satisfy curiosity, but to underscore the profound and often unforeseen depths of human action and its consequences. Act 3. Revenge, the reckoning, its execution, and the grand payoff. The realization had been a slow, agonizing burn, not a sudden flash of insight. Ellie's fate, a direct consequence of my seemingly minor intervention, had stripped away any lingering illusions of simple justice. It revealed a deeper, more pervasive corruption, not just in individuals but in the systems that allowed intellectual theft to flourish. My jadedness transformed into a steely resolve, my meticulousness found a new, darker purpose, and my resilience hardened into an unyielding drive. I wouldn't just patch up my own wounds anymore, I would dissect the disease itself. The immediate objective was no longer Ellie. She was a casualty, a tragic pawn in a much larger, insidious game. My focus shifted to Marcus. He was the original sin, the architect of my first professional demolition. He had used my work, my ideas, my very essence to build his empire, and he had done so with impunity, leveraging loopholes and connections to escape true accountability. He represented the impunity that enraged me, the fundamental injustice that still festered. My rise from rock bottom wasn't a dramatic surge, it was a cold, calculating ascent. I began to map out Marcus's career trajectory since our battle, tracing his every move, every new venture, every partnership. My past legal battles had armed me with a deep, if painful, understanding of the intricacies of intellectual property law, and more importantly, its weaknesses. Marcus, I knew, operated at the fringes, always pushing boundaries, always looking for the next uncredited inspiration. My target wasn't just Marcus the man, but his flagship company, Apex Innovations, a sprawling, seemingly impenetrable fortress built on a foundation I now knew to be questionable. Its success was a constant, mocking reminder of what I had lost. And within Apex Innovations, I found my opening. I had always been meticulous, but now it was a feverish obsession. I spent countless nights poring over public filings, obscure patent databases, and defunct company websites. I used my skills as a digital architect not to build, but to dismantle, reverse engineer, and expose. My goal was to prove a pattern, to reveal that Marcus's original theft from me was not an isolated incident, but part of a systematic exploitation of emerging talent and independent contractors. The critical piece of the puzzle came from an unexpected source, an archived forum post from a small, independent developer dating back nearly a decade. He described a nearly identical scenario to mine, a project commissioned by an early Marcus venture, low pay, and then the subsequent uncredited appearance of his code in one of Marcus's breakthrough products. The developer, long since disillusioned, had eventually given up fighting, but he had kept meticulous records just like me. He was another ghost, another Silas who had simply accepted his fate. I reached out to him, cautiously at first, then more directly. His name was Ben Carter. He was hesitant, burned by his past experience, but my own story, told with raw honesty, resonated. I showed him my evidence against Marcus, the damning parallels. The initial shock on his face gave way to a slow, dawning hope. He wasn't alone. Neither was I. Ben became my reluctant, invaluable ally. Together, we started connecting the dots. There were others, too, small-time designers, obscure academics, indie developers, all with similar stories, all too intimidated or too financially exhausted to fight Marcus. My jadedness knew that justice rarely came without a cost, and my resilience pushed me to bear it for a larger cause. We built a dossier, a truly comprehensive and irrefutable collection of evidence, meticulously cataloging every instance of uncredited work, every deceptive contract, every subtle rebranding of stolen intellectual property. It was a symphony of deceit, and Marcus was its conductor. The plan was complex, multi-layered, designed to hit Marcus where it hurt most: his reputation, his credibility, and the very foundation of Apex Innovations. I decided against a direct loss. Lawsuits were messy, expensive, and often settled behind closed doors. I wanted public exposure. I wanted the world to see Marcus for what he truly was. My strategy revolved around a well-respected but fiercely independent investigative tech journalism outlet known for its deep dives into corporate malfeasance. They had a reputation for thoroughness and a vast, influential readership. I approached them anonymously at first, providing a small, tantalizing sample of the evidence, enough to pique their interest without revealing the full scope. The journalist, a sharp, tenacious woman named Lena Petrova, was intrigued. We communicated through encrypted channels, a dance of shadows and whispers. I carefully fed her pieces of the puzzle, guiding her research, allowing her to discover the connections herself. This wasn't about me taking credit, it was about exposing the truth. My meticulous nature ensured every detail was corroborated, every claim backed by undeniable proof. The story was set to break. But I needed one more piece, one final, devastating blow that would not just expose Marcus, but resonate with the wider industry. This is where my dark mirror role came into play. I thought of Ellie, exiled, married off, her potential squandered. Her story, though initially a catalyst for my own reevaluation, was also a powerful example of the indirect, destructive consequences of intellectual dishonesty. Apex Innovations, Marcus's company, had recently announced a massive new project, a groundbreaking AI-driven creative platform that promised to revolutionize content generation. It was being hailed as Marcus's magnum opus, solidifying his genius status. My meticulous research, however, revealed a dirty secret. The core algorithms, the very heart of this innovation, were a sophisticated, heavily disguised reengineering of a neglected open-source project from years ago, developed by a small, ethical collective of AI researchers. They had given their work to the community, hoping for collaboration, not exploitation. Marcus had seen opportunity, not ethics. I gathered the final, irrefutable evidence: code comparisons, internal Apex development documents that hinted at the theft, and even a disgruntled former Apex programmer who, after much persuasion, agreed to an anonymous interview with Lena, confirming the illicit origins. This was the grand payoff I had been seeking: not just personal revenge, but a systemic exposure. The article dropped like a bomb. It wasn't just a story. It was a multi-part expose, meticulously detailed, compellingly written, with corroborating documents and expert testimonials, including Ben Carter's on-the-record account. It began with Marcus's initial rise, detailing his pattern of intellectual property theft, including the theft from me and Ben, providing compelling evidence for each claim. It painted him as a serial intellectual predator, a man who built his empire by preying on the unprotected. But Lena, with my subtle guidance, added a crucial, unexpected dimension. She explored the wider societal impact of such theft, highlighting not just the direct victims but the ripple effects, the stifled innovation, and the careers derailed. She interviewed industry experts who spoke of the chilling effect such acts had on creativity. And subtly, she wove in anonymous anecdotes of those who had suffered indirectly, people who had tried to build careers but were pushed out, their spirits broken, their dreams unfulfilled. Without naming her, Lena included a brief, poignant narrative of a young, ambitious woman from a traditional background who, after multiple professional setbacks tied to a single, undisclosed ethical breach, was forced to abandon her independence and return to a life she had actively resisted. The world erupted. The article went viral, sparking outrage across the tech and creative industries. Apex Innovations' stock plummeted. Investors demanded answers. Partners threatened to pull out. Marcus, once untouchable, was suddenly drowning in a sea of public condemnation and legal threats from his newly emboldened victims. The irony wasn't lost on me. His genius AI platform built on stolen ideas was now the very thing leading to his downfall. It was a precise, perfectly aimed hit, striking at the heart of his carefully constructed facade. The grand payoff was seeing Apex Innovations, once a symbol of his ill-gotten success, slowly crumble under the weight of its founder's deceit. Contracts were terminated, partnerships dissolved, and a cascade of lawsuits from previously silent victims, now armed with Lena's public expose, began to pile up. Marcus's reputation was not just damaged, it was utterly obliterated. He was publicly shamed, professionally ruined, and faced the prospect of bankruptcy and protracted legal battles for the rest of his life. He who lived by the stolen idea died by the exposed truth. The immediate consequences were clear. For Marcus, total ruin. For Ben and the other victims, a measure of vindication, a voice finally heard. For me, a quiet, unsettling peace. The weight, the simmering contempt, the deep-seated distrust, it hadn't vanished, but it had shifted. The phantom pain was still there, but it was no longer a wound, perhaps just a scar. The act of dismantling Marcus, of exposing the systemic rot, had been a catharsis deeper than any simple job rejection could provide. But the story had one final, bitter twist, one that brought the ripple effects back into sharp focus. A few months after the Apex Innovations scandal, I received an anonymous email. It contained a single link to an obscure social media profile, a name I didn't recognize at first, but a profile picture that made my blood run cold. It was Ellie. Older certainly, but unmistakably her. Her profile was public, though sparsely updated. It showed her in traditional attire, her face devoid of the vibrant ambition I remembered. There were photos of what appeared to be her new home, her new family, a kind, older man, and heartbreakingly 2 small children. The twist wasn't that she'd found happiness. It was a comment she'd left on an old post long before the Apex scandal. It was a reply to a friend who asked about her career hopes. I had so many dreams, Ellie had written, a lament across the years. But after that big job at Silas's company fell through, it was just one failure after another. It felt like every door closed. Then the Apex Innovations scandal hit. My fiancé's family were investors. They lost everything. The shame, the debts, it was too much. We had to break it off. My parents had to find someone else quickly to help pay the debts, someone willing to overlook everything. This is my life now, her fiancé's family, investors in Apex Innovations, the same company whose collapse I had meticulously engineered. My revenge against Marcus, my pursuit of systemic justice, had not just ruined his future, it had unknowingly reached across the globe and touched Ellie's once again. The job rejection had been the first domino. My systematic takedown of Marcus had been the final cataclysmic blow, trapping Ellie in a life of profound resignation. The vindication I'd felt against Marcus was now tinged with a profound, unsettling melancholy. I hadn't intended to further ruin Ellie. My focus had been singularly on the man who embodied the professional betrayal that scarred me. Yet my righteous pursuit had created an unforeseen, devastating ripple, ensnaring an individual who, for all her flaws, was not the primary target of my ultimate reckoning. The cost of retribution, I realized, was rarely contained to the perpetrator. It spread like a wildfire, consuming everything in its path. I found a new quiet in my apartment, a deeper, more reflective silence. The order remained, but my soul was less settled. Justice had been served, yes, but at what immeasurable price? I had found a strange, bittersweet resolution, a vindication of principle, but it came wrapped in the heavy cloak of unintended consequences. The world was rarely black and white, and revenge, even righteous revenge, could leave its own trail of unexpected devastation. The digital clock glowed, marking another early morning, another dawn. My story was told. The cycle, for now, had ended. Subscribe to Tales of Revenge channel for new revenge stories daily.